Concern that a proposed plan to delay the decommissioning of old coal-fired power stations could threaten investments from wealthy countries. Critics say this could harm local exporters and put thousands of lives at risk. Let's have this conversation now with energy expert Professor Mark Swilling. Prof, thank you for making time for us. The ANC NEC is seized this weekend with a decision on whether or not they must support this proposal by the Minister of Electricity to extend the lifespan of these coal-fired power stations. So, if it gets a green light from the NEC and from Cabinet, what do you think will be the implications?
Well, if the implication is that that means slowing down investments in renewables, then that's going to be a disaster. So there may be a case for keeping some electricity generation units going, but it's much more important to fix those power stations that are not too old and to get their performance up to scratch. That's going to make the biggest impact and the biggest difference. Plus, the continued investment in renewables. In 2022, 30 gigawatts of renewables were approved as part of the pipeline, and there should be no slowing down of that program.
And the Minister of Electricity has said that they don't want that program to slow down, so they will still be ramping up renewable energy and making sure that as soon as possible we start seeing that capacity on the grid. But even if that becomes the case, Prof, if you want to extend the lifespan of these power stations, I imagine that's going to cost a lot of money. So economically, is it viable? Because the Minister, Pravin Gordhan of Public Enterprises, says the little capital that's available must actually be spent on trying to fasten the process of bringing renewables on stream.
Yes, I think that is that. I would agree with that statement, but I think we also should take note of the fact that the Minister of Finance also said recently that no investment will be made available for new generation, to extend and improve generation at the moment. And that is consistent with his budget speech back in February when he said, we're going to bail out Eskom on condition they shift their focus away from generation to transmission, and we're not going to be putting any good money after bad. So what that means is that the Minister of Electricity is going to have to focus on getting private sector involvement in these old coal-fired power stations, either by selling them or concessioning them out. And the private sector will only come in if they're going to make a profit, which means they have to push up the prices to cover the huge amount of costs involved in getting them up to scratch, which in turn is going to push up electricity prices for everybody, and it's going to have the biggest impact on the poor. And in any case, it's going to take 3 to 5 years to happen, by which time renewables will be on the grid at a much cheaper rate. So it doesn't really make much financial sense.
The minister said that the problem is that we don't have the same equivalence when you look at how much megawatt we're losing because of the decommissioning of some of the units versus how much we are getting in on the stream from the renewables. And the example he gave recently is of the Komati power station, and he says we were getting about 1,000 megawatts of electricity. Now that's been taken out. The last unit was decommissioned last year, and he says from the 1,000 megawatts that have been taken out, now you are getting about close to 200 megawatts, which is coming from wind and solar. And so the point he's making is that we need to start thinking about, okay, in the next couple of years, the units that are going to be taken out, are we going to have the same equivalence of megawatts coming from renewables? And he seems to believe that's not going to be the case, at least for now.
Yeah, but the example that you're citing, which he referred to, is factually incorrect. Komati, by the time it was closed down, was not at 1,000 megawatts. It was down to about 200 megawatts because all the old units had been steadily decommissioned over the years. And you can't focus on one power station and say How do you replace that with renewables in the same location? These are two completely different systems. We have 17 power stations in South Africa at the moment that gives us 86% of our energy. But what the future looks like is thousands of smaller generation units spread out across the country. It's a fundamentally different systemic paradigm, and we need to accept that. The real answer to your question comes from our official cabinet-approved energy policy, the Integrated Resource Plan, which says by 2030 we must shut down 11 gigawatts of capacity, 11,000 megawatts, but we must have built 24,000. So we have to accelerate the building of renewables, which is now going to happen as a result of the decisions in 2022, and we must stay the course and focus on that. All we need is 10 gigawatts, and we can end load shedding, and that can happen in 2 years. Why slow that? Why put that under threat by creating uncertainty that the government is no longer really committed to that program, which also puts into jeopardy the $8.5 billion investment that would be useful. It's not going to solve all the problems. It's a small contribution to what needs to be invested, but it is a significant one. We need FDI.
Isn't the other problem here, Prof, the fact that you have a government that's also delayed in bringing these renewables and signing off on these IPPs? So when the electricity minister assesses the situation and says, okay, these are our targets as per the IRP, our energy master plan, but given that we failed as a government to be very quick in starting the process of bringing in renewables on stream, then that means by the time, as you said, we reach a stage where some units have to be off, we should have been able to build this kind of infrastructure for renewables, but because we started late, that's going to be delayed too.
Yeah, it could have gone a bit faster, but we must accept what the Energy Action Plan says. The Energy Action Plan, which was adopted after the President made his breakthrough statement last July, which committed South Africa to an energy transition. Then the Energy Action Plan was adopted, and in the Energy Action Plan, it specifically says, if you add it all up, roughly 30 gigawatts of renewables is in the pipeline. There are approvals in place for that to happen. The private sector was gearing up for massive investments, as well as the state-owned financial institutions like the PIC and the IDC and the Development Bank of Southern Africa. All of these institutions were gearing up for the 1.5 trillion rands worth of investments to make the Just Energy Transition Plan work. Now, this announcement about extending the coal-fired power stations, which everybody knows is going to be more expensive than renewables as an option, has caused uncertainty, and that is slowing down the mobilization of capital that's needed to accelerate the build-out of renewables that we desperately need to end load shedding. So the real problem here is uncertainty. That's what's being created here, and that is really, really not good for investment, whether local or international.
Do you think the private sector has the appetite to come in and assist? Because from the plan that the minister presented, they can bring in the private sector at some of the units, and you've explained that the implication may be that the cost of electricity is going to rise once they come in, because of all the other variables. But is there appetite from them to, knowing the kind of crisis and the problems that the power plants have had over the years, are they interested?
Well, almost all big financial institutions internationally and locally, all the big banks in South Africa, for example, have got board resolutions prohibiting new investment in coal-fired power generation. So on the whole, nobody anywhere in the world is thinking of massively increasing the amount of investment in coal, because you're just not going to find the investors. So the kinds of people who are going to come in are going to be the kinds of investors who have an appetite for very high risk, who don't have ethical commitments, in line with climate science and climate resolutions, including our own policies. And so what they're going to say is, listen, these power stations are old and decrepit, skoros. We need to actually spend a lot of money to fix them up, to kind of take them forward. We have to also clean out the corruption. This is all going to cost a lot of money. It's going to take 2 or 3 years to get up and running. And for that, we need Eskom to buy the energy from us, or the transmission entity by then to buy the energy from us, and this is what we want to get paid. I very much doubt that that price is going to be less than the current prices. It's probably going to be double.
So we've spoken about the economic viability. Environmentally, is it feasible? Because the minister seems to believe that there's a possibility of exemptions being given to the non-compliant power stations if they're not going to be able to meet their emissions targets.
Well, there's a court ruling which says that all power stations must comply with the minimum environmental standards by March 2025. And, you know, that's a court order. That's not just a government policy. That's a court ruling. And so what he is talking about is getting an exemption from that. Nobody really knows how that is going to be possible. If the disaster regulations were still in place, and he was a big defender of removing the disaster regulations, he might have been able to use those regulations as a legal basis for circumventing compliance with the minimum emission standards. But that disaster regulations have been removed. So he's going to face a really tricky legal problem. If you want to change the environmental laws to get around that problem, that'll take a couple of years. So it's really not clear how he's going to get around the court ruling for power stations to comply. That is going to be a big issue. And if we do start trying to get around those minimum environmental standards, that's going to put in jeopardy all our international commitments and our international reputation, which is important, because that will affect our exports. So increasing numbers of countries, especially in Europe, our biggest trading partner, are introducing carbon border taxes. So if your products have been made with carbon-intensive energy, i.e. coal, you're going to be heavily taxed, which means you're going to get excluded, which makes us a pariah once again in terms of global ethical commitments.
Professor Mark Swilling, thank you for joining us for this conversation.